I'm back, everybody, and today I've brought some excellent slides of Tabitha toad and Paulo piranha to show you, so we can compare how scientists classify them in the taxonomy of animals. Tabitha is not a fish, but she and Paulo are similar in many ways. It's true that Tabitha and Paulo don't look very much alike, but as the saying goes, you can't judge a book by its cover. When classifying animals, scientists often search for similarities as well as differences. One similarity between Tabitha and Paulo is that, as you know, they are both members of the animal kingdom. You've learned that scientists classify animals as cold-blooded or warm-blooded. Does anyone know which category Tabitha belongs? Do you think that her body maintains a constant internal temperature like yours? Or does her temperature adjust to her surroundings like a fish does? Yes, her body temperature fluctuates, so she is classified as a cold-blooded animal like Paulo. That's another way that they are similar to one another. They are both animals, and they are both cold-blooded. Now take a closer look at Tabitha toad. Can you tell just by looking at her whether she is cold-blooded or warm-blooded? No, but once you learn a bit more about her habits, you will understand how scientists determined that she is cold-blooded. You know that scientists also classify animals according to whether or not they have backbones. Think about what you learned about Tabitha's backbone. Yes, there it is. Just like you and Paulo, Tabitha has vertebrae, a column of bones down her back. Who remembers what scientists call animals with backbones? Right, she's a vertebrate. So Paulo and Tabitha are both cold-blooded vertebrates. Does anyone remember any other fish characteristics? Good answers. Make a prediction about which characteristics Tabitha shares with Paulo. Do Tabitha and other toads have gills, scales, or fins? Do they lay eggs or live in water? These are rather tricky questions because toads belong to a group of animals that change during their lifetime. Their bodies change, their habitats change, and their habits change. I'm going to share lots of information with you today, so get ready for some miraculous surprises. Before we go any further, I want to introduce the name of Tabitha toad's group of animals. Some of you may already know it. How do scientists classify toads? Yes, they are members of a class of animals known as amphibians. Most amphibians spend part of their lives in water and part on land. Toads love the water. Like all amphibians, Tabitha began her life as an aquatic animal, living in water. She spends most of her time on dry land now. In fact, she loves the woodlands, but every spring she makes her way to small freshwater ponds in the wetlands to lay her eggs. That's why Tabitha was in the wetlands when I took this picture of her. Just before I took this picture, she laid a few thousand eggs in the shallow water. Toads must lay their eggs in water because their soft jelly-like coverings can easily dry out in the air. Come and see. Like fish, amphibians reproduce by spawning. A male toad fertilized these eggs after the female deposited them in the water. Soon many of them will hatch into larvae, just like fish eggs do, but most of the eggs will never hatch. Can anyone think of why this is so? There are so many ways the eggs can be destroyed: by becoming a tasty meal for a predator, being washed away in a flood, or drying up if there's not enough rain. The small percentage of eggs that do hatch will move on to the next stage of development. This is the larva stage of most frogs, toads, and salamanders. We call them tadpoles. Tadpoles have gills, just like fish, and use their gills to breathe underwater. They are herbivores and eat tiny aquatic plants, but they're in constant danger because other fish can swallow them whole. Most tadpoles don't survive, but those that do survive undergo a miraculous change. They morph or change into very different looking creatures with very different habitats. This transformation process of changing appearance from one stage to another is called metamorphosis. As tadpoles grow, skin begins to cover their gills, and they grow lungs, so they are able to breathe air on land. Tiny legs appear. They begin to look more like land creatures as their tails disappear. Several species of frogs that live in the wet tropical rainforests skip the tadpole stage. Their eggs hatch, and the young are mature versions of the adult frogs. The Suriname toad's eggs develop in pores on the adult's back until they emerge fully developed. These amphibians that survive to adulthood will be hopping and crawling around on land, searching for food just like Tabitha. Plant life will no longer interest them. Instead, they'll snatch at bugs, worms, spiders, and slugs with their sticky tongues. Most adult amphibians are carnivorous. Some of the toad's larger relatives, like bullfrogs, even eat small mammals and birds. The world's biggest frog is the West African Goliath frog. It is the size of a pet cat and eats other frogs, baby crabs, and snakes. Frogs and toads are the largest group of amphibians. Because they have so many of the same characteristics, many people have a hard time telling them apart. The main difference between them is that toads' skin is a bit drier than frogs' skin. Remember that although they make up the largest group of amphibians, they are not the only group of amphibians. In order to study amphibians better, scientists classify them into 3 separate groups. Have you ever seen a salamander? Scientists classify salamanders and their close living relatives, newts, as a second separate category of amphibians. Perhaps you've seen these four-legged, tailed animals while hiking in the woods or even in your own backyard. Sometimes salamanders are confused with lizards, but salamanders are amphibians. Lizards belong to another group of animals that we will talk about another day. Skin is one of the amphibian's most important organs. Tabitha and other toads like her have skin that is dry and leathery. Other amphibians have slimy skin because their skin needs to stay moist in order for them to breathe. Amphibians use lungs to breathe on land, but also draw oxygen through their skin. In order for this process to work properly, the skin of most amphibians must be kept moist. A word of caution here. When you handle frogs and salamanders, be sure to keep the animals moist so their skin doesn't dry out. Otherwise, it would be hard for them to get oxygen when they need. In order to stay wet, amphibians will hop into water or crawl beneath a moist log. Most frogs, toads, and salamanders molt or shed their skins, often eating their own skins for extra nutrients once they shed. The third and smallest group of amphibians lives deep underground. Look at this picture and see if you recognize them. What do you see? They do look like earthworms, don't they? But earthworms are not amphibians. Rather, these tube-like creatures, not nearly as common as earthworms, belong to the group of amphibians known as caecilians, or slowworms. They look a bit like other amphibians, only without legs. They need very wet conditions and live in tropical or warm climates only. These interesting animals range in size from only about 5 inches to more than 5 feet long. They have very sharp teeth and large jaws. And guess what? Caecilians have 2 lungs. These legless pattern breakers live most of their lives underground, coming up only occasionally to feed. Most scientists generally agree that amphibians evolved from an early group of fish with lobed or fleshy fins hundreds of millions of years ago, long before the dinosaurs. Scientists continue to study fossil remains, trying to figure out the exact way in which this slow change occurred over a long period of time. Today, amphibians live everywhere on Earth except Antarctica. Because these cold-blooded vertebrates depend on moisture to live, many of them live in tropical rainforests or near rivers, lakes, and streams. Amphibians that live in cold climates become dormant as their bodies slow down in winter, burrowing deep underground or burying themselves in the top layer of mud at the bottom of ponds to stay warm. Dormant amphibians hibernate, living off stored energy for months at a time. Next time we meet, you will learn all about the way scientists classify snakes like Anna anaconda. I'll give you a hint. Remember when I said that salamanders are often mistaken for lizards, but that lizards belong to a different group of animals? Well, Anna belongs to the same group as lizards. Does anyone want to predict the name of that group? Wait and see if you're right. For now, I want to congratulate you all on being such good sleuths or detectives. Any taxonomist would love to have your help in classifying Earth's animals. See you soon!